All right, folks, thanks again for joining us for Rubrik Zero Labs Cyber Security Decoded. Really excited for today's episode for a couple of reasons. The first is going to be our guest. I'm just incredibly excited, but I'll get into that here in a minute. Want to start this episode by saying a big shout out to Caleb Tolan. He's taken this content and gotten us on other platforms, so we're officially influencers and podcasters now. So for those joining us for the first time, this is a Rubrik Zero Labs session designed to really do a couple of things. The first is engage with senior leaders, primarily at the CISO level. And then really the second part is what's top of mind for them? What do we see driving the larger cybersecurity threat landscape? And ultimately, what should we do about that? We've been very lucky in our past episodes to focus on the overall threat landscape to include specific areas, industry responses, and the senior leaders we've had in the past have spoken about their investments and their career growth. We've been lucky to have Wendy Whitmore from Palo Alto Networks Unit 42, Sandra Joyce, Head of Intelligence at Mandiant and a Vice President at Google Cloud, Suzette Kent, former CIO of the US government, and Kavitha Mariappan was our last guest from Zscaler, and she had a couple different teams that she oversaw there, so that was a great conversation. So with no further ado, I just want to jump right into today. Our guest today is just, there's so many questions I have and want to get into, so let's go through the resume before I introduce. First of all, we have the most recent position being the CISO for Johnson & Johnson. Also previously been a Chief Security Officer and Vice President for Medco. A former Head of Global Security for Avaya, where she was responsible for securing the World Cup networks for Korea and Japan. As if that is not enough in the private sector, she is also a former FBI Special Agent, where she went through undercover drug operations and terrorist bombing investigations in her time. And I think one of the most impressive parts of the resume, she was in the first class of women graduates out of the West Point the United States Military Academy. Also, just to round it out one last time, she's also been appointed by the Secretary of Defense to the Defense Advisory Committee on Women, and also appointed by the Secretary of State to oversees Security Advisory Committee, and is on multiple board of directors for the Health ISAC, ACES International, and also sits on multiple advisory boards for several private companies to include Rubrik. She is on our CISO advisory board. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Marene Allison. Marene, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, Steve, thank you for having us. This is awesome.
Hopefully I didn't miss anything too important in the resume. There's so much there that I just want to dive into.
There's a few things, I'm working with CISA now. I mean, most of the important things I'm doing now, there's no compensation, but they're good. With CISA and Aspen Cyber Security Institute, NTSC, all of those things, very valuable, and glad that I'm now a recovered CISO and an advocate for CISOs everywhere, and this discussion around the role of the CISO going forward.
Well, even the things I missed would have had me excited to talk with you. So let's just go ahead and dive into it. Here's what we'll do, Marene. We're just going to keep it real informal. Just a couple of friends talking. The internet will be very gracious with us, I'm sure. Everyone's super chill on the internet. I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you, and then I'd also like to sprinkle in a couple of hot takes. I'll ask you for a professional hot take and a personal hot take, and I'll do the same. So if that's great, are you comfortable if we just dive right into it?
Absolutely. Let's go.
So I want to start right off with what you just mentioned. You mentioned, talking about helping guide CISOs and thinking about how the industry should think about CISOs. You recently focused on some of the work out of the Aspen Digital Institute, and I thought that piece that you recommended, I saw it on LinkedIn and some other places. There was the very ending I thought was probably the single most interesting thing, where you talked about CFOs used to be considered advisors to the C-suite and boards, and now they're critical for both. And your view and the view of the Aspen Digital Institute was that CISOs are now in that same position. That role used to be advisor, now it's critical. I love the parallel example, but let me just ask right up front, how real is that? How close to reality are CISOs considered vital parts of boards and C-suites?
Well, I just came back from speaking at the National Association of Corporate Directors and about this very thing and what are corporate directors doing around knowledge, around all the different requirements by the SEC to include the cybersecurity. I don't think it's going to be, there's a rush to get CISOs on boards right now. I think they realize that there is a need for the expertise out there. But I don't think that you're going to see, hundreds of CISOs being signed up to get on boards, and that's the next career move for a CISO. There's a lot there. I would tell you it gets into the probably when CFOs were back in the early 2000s, it was the same thing. Do we really need a CFO on the board? And I think that's what you're starting to see now is that understanding. Now, there is one company that I work with. I'm on their Cyber Security Advisory. That's Lutron, and the light switch company. They have a cybersecurity advisory or committee that then looks at things in a little bit more detail for the board. And I give their CEO credit for setting that up. It was pretty amazing to see it. And she's not even a public company where they're on the SEC. But she said, we have a need because of the technology that we do. And I think that's what you're going to start seeing. And then as that happens, CISOs will show themselves as risk partners, business partners, understanding how business works and operates. And that will then, you'll see the slide of CISOs onto boards.
I think it's a fascinating view of how things are changing and looking for those parallels. I'm going to take my first shot at my professional hot take because I think it's right off something you said. Having been in this industry quite a long time, I've noticed that we're very quick to talk about how boards and C-suites are remiss for not including CISOs and not including these skill sets. I actually think there's just as much damage the other way. I think as cybersecurity practitioners, we are remiss for not learning how boards think and how other C-suites think. We're so focused on our own topics that I think we miss a lot of capability and decision making that we could apply to our own skill sets. So I'll throw that out as my first professional hot take, and I'll ask you for yours here after this next question, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
So, as you know, sitting on our CISO advisory board here at Rubrik, we recently acquired a company called Laminar, data security and posture management space. They're a leader in that industry, that rapidly emerging market. One of the things that's been interesting since we've gone public with that acquisition is there's been quite a bit of pushback, to be totally frank. There's been a number of leaders and other industries, and even some of our own clients say, I don't understand. Why is a backup and recovery company focused on resilience, worried about posture management? And the thing that I really see is a lot of benefit comes from resilience. My first master's was in emergency management, where they preach resilience, they preach recovery because it saves you in response. So I've been a little bit surprised by the reaction. As a recovering CISO, I love the way you phrase that. How do you think resiliency and understanding your posture fits into what a CISO cares about, and are we at the right view of that in this industry?
You asked two questions there. So I'll go with when we look at resiliency, and I have to tell you, born of the era, I can build the wall higher, I can build the moat deeper, and I can protect, and nothing will get into my company. And, I really truly believe that till NotPeti happened. Once NotPeti happened, I saw some really good friends of mine that were CISOs that said, I'm out. There's nothing I can do to protect against that. I got nation states coming at my data. There's nothing I can do that's going to make it so that they can't get in. And I looked at it, took me about 30 days, and I go, you know what? This is really just about resilience. This is what, and this goes back to your hot take, is that we have to learn the language of business. And years ago, it was Y2K or some other, it was when I was doing the World Cup also, is that it wasn't that bad things weren't going to happen. It was going to be, what is our response? How do we recover? And how do we move on? And then what is the damage done? And that, really with Rubrik and Laminar, the idea of your data, it's not this like sphere that's just always protected and nobody's going to get at it. That's crazy. We've got to use the data. So the idea is what is the resilience around it? The backup, recovery, All of that is extremely, extremely important. And that's the part of us now starting to think like business. It's about risk. It's not about the best security ever and no one's ever going to get in here. It's if they get in, what's going to happen? How do I protect? How do I detect? How do I protect? How do I recover? And that's the important piece of why resilience is now the language of CISOs.
I love the NotPeti example. The one that sticks in my mind was when the entire cybersecurity space dealt with Agent BTZ. I was back in the intelligence community, and I was working at a combatant command for a 4-star general, and we ended up on a roadshow for a year talking about why our combatant command had 0 infections. There was no impact from this massive international event. And it ultimately boiled down to 6 months before that happened. And for those who aren't familiar, that intrusion really targeted air-gapped networks. It used USBs. Our 4-star general banned USBs and had our J6, our CISO equivalent in the military, physically disable all USB ports. And he had no idea this was coming. He just didn't like the risk. He just said, you can't convince me. I need people walking around with USBs. So it went away. And it was the easiest presentations I ever gave. We asked all these highly technical questions of us, and how did you see this coming? It's like, we didn't. The boss just said no USBs, and there were no USBs, and we had a radically different reaction to the entire rest of the world, not to be too dramatic about it. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think your NotPeti example is very much in the same vein as that.
Well, so Steve, just a little sidebar here is this the only thing, the thing that actually helped Johnson & Johnson during NotPetya is non-trusted software, non-controlled software like MEDOX couldn't go on SCCM. It had to be manually looked at, admin rights requested and installed. And since NotPetya was only floating there for truly 3 hours, our tax guy in the Ukraine missed the window. He was not real happy when I told him, no, you're not updating anything with MEDOX and don't worry about it. We'll figure out what we're doing with the Ukrainian tax system. But it was kind of, because I looked at it, we looked at it for weeks trying to figure out why didn't we get hit. And that was it. Non-trusted software not allowed on SCCM.
I love the wins wherever you can get them. You just never know what'll break your way.
It was a cheap one, but it worked.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to put you on the hot seat a little bit and ask you for what is a hot take you have about the professional viewpoint.
Oh, I was going to give you a non-professional one there for a moment. It's so. I really think it's, and this has been, and my team knows this at Johnson & Johnson, the overuse of somebody being a CIO, a CTO, or a CISO. It's, I'm the top person, so now I'm the CISO or I'm the CTO. And they really may have very little span of control or really very little business influence. They're really a technical specialist or they're an IT security person. And that just, it's like, okay, yes, you're the top security person, but now there's a lot more to go in understanding the business and becoming a CISO or a CIO or a CTO. So that's my hot take.
I could not agree more with that hot take. That reminds me of years and years ago when I was kind of really getting started in the private sector and learning a bunch of things. I had a now mentor of mine, Matt Peters. He's running a company. He's done a number of things, but he would always say, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're not paying attention. And that was one of his handful of golden rules. And I think that's so true. We get caught up in titles and then we don't pay attention to the right things. And there's a lot to be missed.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and those titles, okay, so you get invited to certain parties or to certain seminars, which is great for education and training, but the fiduciary responsibility of the position, people have to understand it's more than just creating IT security controls.
Absolutely. So I want to dive into some more of the personal side. Your experience is just so fascinating to me. In particular, we could just talk about the CISO piece, but I actually want to go all the way back. You're in the first class of women to graduate from West Point. I can't fathom the uphill struggle that was. You were a FBI undercover agent and a regular field agent doing terrorism. When that was a thing, very few people did, little less, very few women. As a former military person, as a former special agent, those were hard for me when I did them. I can't imagine the extra challenges you had. What are some of your strategies you've picked up along the way that helps you succeed in tumultuous time frames and really helped you be successful?
Yeah, so everything I've learned, I've built on. And just because someone hadn't done it before doesn't mean that somebody can't do it. Probably one of the very first things I learned is that that equipment doesn't care whether it's male or female. The equipment may be designed for males versus females, or tall, thin people versus short, squatty people, but it is just equipment. And there's a mission, and you can either do it or not. There's qualifications. And so if you're able to do it, then it doesn't matter male or female. It's you meet the qualifications to do that job. And the other thing is there's a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have done if I had gone to MIT or to Wellesley. That because I went to West Point, I learned how to successfully jump out of a perfectly good airplane. And so those ideas that I could learn how to do something that was absolutely terrifying and for no real rational reason you should do it, but I could do it and I had the mental strength to do it. The other thing is when I was 17 and raised my hand on the plane at West Point and said I would defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, little did I think, because there wasn't even computer science at the time. Who knew there was going to be cyber and cybersecurity, and I was going to be a CISO. But what I learned is I can learn, and that very much what we do is in defense of our way of life, of our nation, and the protection of critical infrastructure and our government. And that took me all the way through. When I was looking at Korea and Japan for the World Cup and the first use of voice over IP, it would be easy to say, hey, nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's run a SOC on this. But sat down and listened to people, networking people, on what did we need to put in place. Listen to the Avaya experts on how the technology could be utilized. And then using the information and realizing that hard scans, even by an ally country, could bring down our network. And how do you manage that? How do you manage the workforce if the North Koreans are going to start bombing fishing vessels while you're in the middle of the World Cup? All of those things coming together over time helped prepare me for in March 2020 when we all shut down for COVID, and then J&J announced we're making a vaccine. And we truly, it was that moment when you're sitting there like, and I had been thinking in the back of my mind, hey, I'll have my 10 years in September. Maybe it's a good time for me to retire. And instead of retiring, I said, no, I got this. I'm best qualified to run this department and help the company around the cyber element, which is going to be huge on the development and deployment of this vaccine. Let me stay and let me do this. And it truly was a full lifetime of learning, knowledge, expertise, resiliency to be able to make it through till I retired this year.
I can't imagine what that would have been like being the CISO at Johnson & Johnson as that vaccine is being developed and rolled out. And there's no way we're not going to talk about that. So I'm just going to ask, what was that like? I mean, you're you're like all the rest of us. We're deeply impacted. We're seeing what's happening on the news. We're seeing it in our own lives. And you had to have known your company was sitting on something that was simultaneously both vital and wanted by everyone else in the world. How did you approach securing that and lead your team through that?
Well, you're going to laugh. Very first call I made once I found out, I called Chris Krebs.
That's probably not a bad call in this situation.
Well, he was the director of CISA, and I said, "Hey, Chris, we got a problem." And I said, my threat posture just went from medium to medium high to off the charts. J&J's making a vaccine. We're going to need an element that connects the critical infrastructure to the government. And he went off and Operation Warp Speed and working with the government and how that all interplayed. He did his thing. But it really was, trying to explain to the executives at J&J. And every board or executive meeting that I had done, I always did a threat profile. Okay, we have our hacktivists, and we have our nation states, and we have our insider, and we have our criminal element. And I had always portrayed it which one was the hottest and what we were seeing in the threat profile. I just at that point put it up and I said, see all of these? These are all off the chart now. Every single one of these is coming at us in a way that is going to test whether we're able to prevent it and to ensure that we can get the vaccine out the door.
Yeah, as all of that was happening, I was at Mandiant at the time, and the team I was a part of, we owned exactly what you're talking about. We owned threat attribution and prioritizing all that. And I remember being in meetings on our side, sitting there saying, it used to be like, well, which teams are we bringing in? Are we bringing in the espionage experts? Are we bringing in the hacktivist experts? Is our China team
bring them all in?
And that was exactly it. Yeah, like, no, this is all hands on deck. Our incident response and managed defense teams need all of this, and they need it now. Like, this is a true all hands on deck moment, and you don't get many of those. You don't get many of like everybody. Wake everybody up, put everybody to work, and it was a neat thing to be part of, and I can't imagine what that would have been like on your end. It was special for us, and I can't imagine how special that would have been for your team. Okay, so enough things that we agree on. I'm going to throw out my personal hot take here. I've gotten a lot of grief for my personal hot takes in the past. I don't like ranch dressing. That caused a lot of controversy. I think Beyonce's new album is overrated. That definitely caused some controversy. I'm gonna keep this thread going here. I think theme parks are totally overrated, and I actually can't stand them. Your Disney Worlds, your Six Flags, all of them, cannot stand them. You're just standing in line all day, 0% fun. The only exception, water parks. Water parks rule. So that's my hot take for this session. So
I'm going to counter that, Steve.
Okay, let's do it.
And I think you're right. If your whole experience is the park, then you're absolutely correct. But a couple years ago, I got to take my grandson to Disney World. And of course, for the adults, it was loading the car and all the stuff that adults do and driving down there and then getting out the hotel and, trying to get to the park. But you know what? In the eyes of a 6-year-old, the adventure started the moment he got in the car. And all the sights on the way, and then getting to the hotel. And the hotel had a pirate ship in the pool, and it had a splash pad. And then we drove over to the park, and we got to take a trolley ride to a monorail. And then we went in. For him, the park wasn't as much of the experience as the whole thing. And that's what I think we do sometimes. We look at a event or the thing, and it really has to be about all of the things around it and the moments you get to share. And my son and daughter-in-law just went down again, and I said, are you going to go to the park? And they go, no, we don't have to. We're going to go to the pool.
Kids love pools. I love that. I love the journey. I love all of that. So let me ask you a question about Journey. Let's a thing that we've been very lucky on this series. We've just had really smart, capable leaders that have really, in particular, had a passion and a focus around diversity and bringing more expertise into a career field that, frankly, is overstressed. It's overtaxed. We all know the numbers. So I think this is a top of mind topic for everyone. You know, at Rubrik, we take it really seriously. I can't imagine someone with the experience that you have, just West Point, FBI, leadership roles in this industry when this industry didn't exist. And if the SecDef and SecState are going to ask you for your expertise on increasing the role of women in these spaces, there's no way I'm not going to ask you. But I'd like to get your opinion on what actually works and what actually doesn't. How do we really drive meaningful changes and bring the capability of underrepresented communities into the space when we need it so badly?
Yeah, just like those board of directors don't know if they really want the diversity of the CISO on their boards, we as CISOs and in IT security, we tend to overqualify what we need in a position versus we'd rather go a year without filling a position because we can't find the right candidate versus filling it with someone with the aptitude and knowledge to learn the position and let them grow in 6 months and to be able to do that position and giving somebody a chance. Years ago, I was in I had physical security, and I had a guy, and he was a former police officer, and he ran my physical security out in Ohio. And I said, hey, anybody who wants to learn computer forensics, raise your hand. And he raised his hand. He's now the CEO of a cybersecurity recruiting firm. And he was, ran the security operations center at J&J for a while and over at CVS. And that's what we've got to understand, that sometimes it's not just the hardcore, can you do Python coding? Can you do this? Can you do that? It's all the other things, especially in corporations. In the government, where there is a defend mission or an attack mission, is really pretty clear. You could have people who know what they're doing there. The military will train them. But in corporate America, 90% of what is done is communicating cybersecurity to the business and helping the business understand how to configure their IT so that they are able to help make it secure. And if you get the right people, give them the right chance, they're unbelievable with what they'll learn, what they're capable of, and you'll get the diversity that you need and want.
Well put and well said. And I think we just can't get it soon enough. So I really, really hope that all of us can keep really pressing on that. So let's get into your personal hot take. I'm really curious what you're going to have for us now.
I don't know. I mean, I always love the diversity of craziness. I guess the one that I would probably say that, and especially since I'm about ready to go on a plane trip and a cruise, is why people can't be nice. That sometimes just being nice and taking a step back. And hey, believe me, I was an Army officer and an FBI agent, carried a gun, all of those things. So, but that's probably the thing now, years later, and hopefully I've learned to be nice. I hope people think I'm nice, is that let's be nice to each other. Let's lead with love versus lead with hate.
I absolutely love that. That's one of those things that's a real pet peeve of mine is people being rude or crass or any of those things. And it's so easy to make people's days better. My daughter, she's 19. I've got 3 kids. I learn different things from each one of them. She intentionally says something nice about someone everywhere she goes. We'll be at the mall and she'll just tell the cashier, I like your earrings, or she'll tell one of her friends, I like your outfit. And I've learned from her, watching her do this, like people light up. She she changes people's day and it costs her nothing. It makes her day better. It's so true. Like, why be mean when we can all just be a little bit more kind to each other? So, Marene, I could have you here all day long. I literally could keep asking you questions for hours. I know you've got stuff going on. So I'll leave it with one last question. The same question we've ended every one of these with. The first one of these I did was with Wendy Whitmore, and we kind of stumbled into a neat discussion about optimism or pessimism, and it's grown into kind of this ending question, which is, as you look back on your career, and as you look back on this industry, where we've been and where we are going, would you consider yourself more optimistic or pessimistic about what's coming next for us?
Oh, I'm an optimist. I mean, I've always loved the new technologies that are coming out and how they can be utilized. I remember when, we went from mainframe to distributed computing and everybody's like, okay, the end is coming. And I'm like, no, this is cool. Now, it did create a data proliferation problem and data going everywhere with lags, but then new technologies came out for that. As we went into, the mobile devices and phones, and now we're into this era and everything is online and in the cloud, people are like, oh my God, the world is going to end. We have to keep it here. Versus now, after COVID, digitization and how do we set the data free? And now, I hear people all over the place, oh, AI, it's going to be the end of us. We have no more coding will be necessary. My life will be over. Well, there's no RACF programmers. We're not sending people to school for RACF programming. You will learn the new thing. And all the opportunities, whether it is saving lives or making the help desk technician much easier because AI can then look at all the scripts out there and tell them what they're looking at. All of that is fascinating. Yeah, will there be challenges? Voice over IP originally, they didn't want to use it because we couldn't make 911 calls. You wouldn't know where a 911 call was. We solved that problem. For every new technology, we will find the next thing that helps us. The hype cycle, AI, or, autonomous vehicles. The reality is the adoption will take a little bit longer. The controls will be put in place, and we will then create a whole new world of how we think, how we compute, how we solve healthcare problems, how we solve world peace. Those are all very, very things we need to lean into and can't say, hey, let's not do that. Let's go back to mainframe computing. No, let's move in. Let's lean in.
Well, Marene, I cannot think of a better sentiment to end this on, so I'm not even going to try. I'm gonna take the victory where we can. I really appreciate your time. I just love this conversation. I could ask you 1,000 questions on every one of these topics, but I just want to say thank you to joining us, and thank you for all the folks on the other end that have taken their time to listen to the two of us talk about things that we find interesting, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Thanks to the tech team for making this all possible.
They do a great job. Thanks, everyone.